At the start of the film, Father Brennan reaches a church being refurbished. He encounters Father Harris, who hands Brennan a snapshot of an infant labeled Sienna. Brennan remarks that the youngster seems quite human, to which Harris responds, "Don't be deceived. Her birth wasn't by natural means." In a reminiscence, we observe a committed young woman who agreed to carry the child. A dark fabric covers her lips, and she's fastened to a cot. Harris mentions that the gestation advanced swiftly. The child should be a teenager by now, and they're merely biding time until she matures. Brennan inquires, "Mature for what?" But Harris admits he can no longer proceed. In a different memory, we witness the young woman begging, "Please, no more contact from it." An evil snarl nears the young woman, and Brennan realizes Harris has vanished. Brennan dashes from the church in search of him, informing Harris that concealment won't cleanse his wrongdoings. Harris retorts, declaring he doesn't seek absolution but yearns for an end to it all, and assures Brennan he'll grasp it in due time. Abruptly, glass shatters and plummets from overhead, and a steel rod strikes Harris's skull. Brennan queries his well-being, to which Harris asserts he's unharmed. Yet, as he pivots to depart, Brennan is aghast to witness a ghastly sight. The rod has cleft Harris's cranium, and Harris grins prior to his demise. In Rome, 1971, American novice Margaret Dino lands at the aerodrome, greeted by Cardinal Lawrence. En route to the Visardelli orphanage, it's disclosed that Margaret's purpose is to embrace the nunhood. The cardinal briefs her on the prevalent dissent against the spurning of dominion, including that of the ecclesiastical. Eventually, they arrive at the orphanage, where Cardinal Lawrence presents Margaret to Abbess Sister Silva, who cordially invites her into their fold. Silva escorts Margaret around the orphanage, sharing that they nurture 62 young girls and that the government has engaged them to accommodate numerous expectant, unwed women. Sister Silva then acquaints Margaret with Sister Angelica, mentioning that Angelica was left at their doorstep as a gravely sick infant. Despite her challenging start, Angelica has become fervently committed and makes sure the youngsters are always cheerful. Suddenly, a girl's shriek is heard, prompting Sister Silva to investigate. As Margaret waits, she spots an illustration on a notice board showing a girl levitating over 5 others, with the names Carlita and Sienna inscribed. Driven by curiosity, Margaret enters an adjacent chamber and observes a girl sketching. Margaret attempts to converse and introduce herself, but the girl remains silent. Instead, she inches closer to Margaret, abruptly seizing her and beginning to lick her. Margaret recoils, and at that moment, Sister Silva returns. Margaret discovers the girl's name is Carlita, the artist behind the notice board's drawing. Carlita hands her another piece of her artwork, and Silva guides Margaret away. Margaret is subsequently escorted to her residence, where she examines the sketch Carlita bestowed upon her. The following dawn, as she's engaged in prayer, Margaret becomes slightly alarmed upon hearing attempts to unlatch the door and eavesdrops on a duo of women conversing. Shortly thereafter, a nun materializes, startling her, and only then does her housemate Luz make an entrance. Subsequently, Luz inquires of Margaret about her journey to Italy for her consecration. Margaret recounts that Cardinal Lawrence served as a clergyman at the orphanage where she was raised, and they forged a close bond due to her troublesome nature. She confesses that she once had visions and was utterly persuaded of their reality, but the Cardinal's arrival at the orphanage aided her in realizing those visions were mere figments of her imagination. Luz confides that for her, it was a voice. She narrates being ousted from her abode at 16, amidst a bitterly frigid evening, with no refuge in sight. A comforting zephyr wrapped around her, carrying a voice that echoed around and within her. The voice consoled her, asserting the insignificance of an earthly dwelling when her true abode was alongside him. On the ensuing evening, Margaret perceives Carlita's absence from her cot. Filled with worry, she sets out in search and is stunned to find a nun binding Carlita to a cot in a separate chamber. As another nun closes the door, Margaret is trying to comprehend the scene when she hears laughter and spots a nun who bursts into tears moments later. Out of nowhere, Luz startles her, revealing she has something to unveil to her that night. Luz escorts Margaret to a nightclub, allowing her to savor life's liberties before her consecration. Eventually, 2 lads, Alfonso and Paolo, come over and suggest a dance. Margaret finds herself swaying with Paolo, and as the evening progresses, she begins to embrace and caress him, only to lose consciousness. Come morning, Luz recounts the prior evening's events to Margaret, who has no recollection of them. Subsequently, Father Brennan makes his acquaintance with Margaret. He discusses the young Sienna, cautioning her that sinister occurrences may soon unfold in her vicinity. As Margaret attempts to depart, he urges a meeting later that night to divulge the full story. Subsequently, Margaret realizes Carlita is missing, and a young girl informs her she's in the naughty room. Margaret promptly approaches Sister Silva to report Carlita's confinement, and Silva clarifies that Carlita had bitten Sister Romano earlier, necessitating her isolation in the naughty room. When Margaret queries the purpose of such a room, Silva states it's for the misbehaving girls. Margaret begins to sympathize with Carlita, trying to comfort her with words. She confides in Carlita, revealing her own past feelings of fearlessness. Suddenly, a piercing scream interrupts them, causing Margaret to hasten away, urging Carlita to go back to her chamber. Entering the source of the commotion, Margaret encounters a woman in labor, shrieking in agony. The woman's cries gradually diminish, giving way to a sinister grin. Then, unexpectedly, the woman bursts into laughter, locking eyes with Margaret. But the laughter is short-lived as the screams return, and Margaret is petrified to see a demonic appendage protruding from the woman's womb, rendering her unconscious on the spot. Margaret then notices Carlita in the company of Angelica. Drawing closer, Angelica shows her the illustration Carlita had given her, which portrays a pregnant lady being held down. Angelica gestures to a particular section of the artwork, claiming it as her own and signifying a boy. Margaret remarks that the image seems a bit improper, which visibly upsets Angelica, causing her to storm off. Yet she returns shortly and plants a kiss on Margaret unexpectedly before departing once more. Some time passes, and they observe Angelica on the terrace. She announces to Margaret that everything is for her, then sets herself ablaze and leaps, ending her life by hanging. That night, Margaret meets with Father Brennan and shares the troubling events from the orphanage. Brennan describes two factions of the church, one faithful to Christ's teachings, which they belong to, and another that overlooks cruelty and homicide for absolute dominance. He warns of church extremists who, fearing secularism's rise, seek to invoke the Antichrist to instill terror and drive people back to faith. When Margaret questions Carlita's relevance, Brennan reveals his excommunication and his reliance on a photo as the clue, suspecting the infant girl pictured to be the Antichrist's future mother. He believes Carlita was born on the 6th day of the 6th month at 6 a.m., bearing the devil's mark, 666, on her body. Brennan discloses that Carlita's records are stored at the orphanage and implores Margaret to retrieve them to uncover Carlita's origins. He divulges their breeding of a creature, a jackal. As Margaret starts to leave, Brennan cautions that if Carlita is the mother, the malevolence within her will resist their efforts, necessitating its eradication. Yet, despite his entreaties, Margaret is skeptical and declines his request for assistance. The next day, on an outing, Margaret asks Carlita if she's ever been scared or troubled by someone's actions. Carlita shares that she sometimes feels uneasy and sees things she can't quite understand as real or not. Margaret empathizes, disclosing that she once had terrifying hallucinations as a child. She believed in them until she realized they were just misleading figments of her imagination. Carlita departs, asserting that her visions are not false. Margaret follows and finds Carlita by a window. She's startled to see Angelica's hand on Carlita's back. Abruptly, Sister Silva appears, alerting Margaret of a commotion and hastening them to leave. Amidst the chaos returning to the bus, Margaret is engulfed by the crowd. Out of nowhere, a demon reaches out, caressing her face with its tongue. That evening, Sister Silva advises Margaret that perhaps it's prudent for her to reconsider and possibly delay her vows. Puzzled, Margaret inquires why, and Sister Silva suggests that proximity to Carlita may be detrimental to her well-being, hinting at a possible illness afflicting Margaret due to this closeness. She sternly instructs Margaret to maintain a distance from Carlita, hinting at potential repercussions otherwise. While heading home, Margaret stumbles upon Paolo, who desperately attempts to escape her presence, imploring her to cease her pursuit. In a state of panic, he urges her to search for a mark before a tragic accident occurs, with a truck striking him down. Margaret dashes to his aid, pleading with bystanders to summon medical help. She comforts him, promising safety, and tries to move him out of harm's way. But then, a scream shatters the calm, and to Margaret's dismay, she discovers Paolo's body horrifically bisected. The following day, as Luz is being veiled and the congregation gathers, Margaret slips into Sister Silva's office to search for Carlita's records. Instead, she stumbles upon a concealed entrance, leading to a subterranean vault. Inside, she finds a collection of files, all marked Cyana. Each dossier includes an image of a malformed infant, each bearing a birthmark resembling 666, with Carlita as the apparent lone survivor. Margaret hastens out clutching the documents, and she ushers Carlita into a chamber, expressing regret for her earlier distrust and affirming her belief in Carlita now. Suddenly, Sister Silva and other nuns burst in. Margaret confronts them, accusing them of their deeds with the infants. The nuns overpower her, forcing her to the ground. As Carlita attempts to help, Margaret glimpses the triad of sixes on Carlita's palette. A nun then hurls Margaret into the naughty room and locks her in. After a while, Margaret discerns hushed voices in the chamber. Curiosity leads her to peer beneath the bed, where she discovers a sketch, presumably Carlita's handiwork. Compelled to investigate further, she peels back the carpet, unveiling yet another drawing hidden underneath. This image catalyzes a cascade of revelations for Margaret, exposing a chilling reality: women are being inseminated by a monstrous entity, coerced into bearing offspring fated to usher in the Antichrist. Battling with denial, Margaret attempts to dismiss these visions as figments of her imagination. However, the room's silence is pierced by a disembodied whisper, and she catches sight of Angelica's specter lurking in a corner, inching closer with each passing moment. Fear grips Margaret, but amidst the terror, Gabriel arrives, declaring the discovery of the files. He urges haste, insisting they must depart immediately. They meet with Father Brennan, and Gabriel presents the documents to him. It comes to light that Brennan had once sought Gabriel's help, which Gabriel had initially dismissed as lunacy. Margaret is adamant about rescuing Carlita, but Gabriel cautions against it, citing danger. Brennan concurs, emphasizing that once their possession of the documents is discovered, they will be pursued, and the only path forward is to substantiate their allegations, as disbelief will otherwise prevail. While perusing the documents, Brennan reveals that, following countless unsuccessful attempts over the years, they now surmise that the only recourse is for the creature to procreate with its progeny. Margaret examines the photograph closely and observes a distinctive mark on the infant's cranium. She remarks that Carlita's mark is not on her cranium but on her palate, deducing that the child in the photograph is not Carlita. They continue to sift through the remaining documents, and Margaret stumbles upon one lacking a photograph, recognizing that the image they possessed originated from this very folder. As Margaret scrutinizes the picture, she's struck by Paolo's last utterances prior to his demise. Abruptly, a haunting recollection emerges, and she vividly recalls the night at the club when she was overpowered and subjected to a demonic ceremony by the entity. Margaret is taken aback by this discovery, tears streaming down her face. Gabriel and Brennan endeavor to soothe her, and upon inspecting her scalp, Brennan uncovers the ominous symbol 666, much to his astonishment. He reveals that her entire existence has been under the church's guardianship, and they likely shuffled her from place to place to obscure their actions. With the realization that Carlita is probably too youthful, they escorted Margaret back to Rome. Margaret tries to depart, but Brennan insists she must stay. He points out that it's the stroke of midnight on June 6th, signaling that her pursuers are nearly upon her. Margaret asserts that should she truly be with child, she demands its removal without delay. The team hurries to find a doctor for the abortion, but Margaret's condition worsens quickly on the way, and unexpectedly, their car is hit by another, leading to the sad demise of all but Margaret. As she steps out of the debris, her body starts shaking with odd spasms, and suddenly, her belly expands rapidly, as though her uterus is instantly growing. She comes to, tied down to a bed in a clinic, and Cardinal Lawrence, who leads the plot, welcomes her. He informs her that the child she will soon deliver will restore the church and draw the faithful back to worship. They escort her to the delivery room, where she has twins, a daughter, and a son. The son is given to Sister Silva by the physician, and all who are there reverently touch his head in a hushed ceremony. Margaret requests Lawrence to cradle her son, and Silva agrees, stating a mother's touch is essential for a child. She passes the boy to her, praising her effort. In a sudden turn, Margaret pierces Lawrence's throat, stunning everyone around, yet she finds herself unable to harm her son. Silva grabs the boy away, and Luz wounds Margaret, leaving her to fall. The plotters escape with the infant boy, abandoning Margaret and her baby girl. Sister Silva commands that all evidence be destroyed by fire to erase their presence. Unexpectedly, Carlita becomes Margaret's rescuer, saving both her and her child from danger. As Margaret gazes upon the consuming fire, she spots a terrifying figure, a sinister, devilish jackal amidst the blaze. The infant boy is handed over to the U.S. envoy Robert Thorne, who is to covertly substitute him for his spouse Catherine's child, which she is believed to have lost. After some years, Margaret dwells in isolation on a mountain with Carlita and her daughter, forming a content family unit. Yet their tranquility is disrupted when Brennan makes an unforeseen return, alerting Margaret to the fact that her existence is known. He clarifies that their survival was never intended, particularly the daughters, and that they will be pursued. Before departing, he discloses that her son has been christened Damien, concluding the film's narrative. Don't forget to subscribe and enable notifications to catch more videos like this. Thank you for watching.